Yeah.
It just feels weird.
It does. No, I get you.
It's like we're broadcasting that we're saying a prayer. So anyway, oh, we lost Laura, but she's on her phone, so hopefully she'll come back.
We might have to wait a little bit because if she is driving, then.
Yeah. Well, we can just start. I mean, either way, I'll include her because she's here. So.
Right.
So. And then, so.
Oh, okay. She's back.
I'm back. Okay, sorry.
Wildfire.
Whoops, you don't want to listen to Christmas music.
Okay, so this one was the negotiating on thin ice. How did everybody feel about everything? Wasn't too bad of one. I like this one, actually.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah.
I thought it was good.
Yeah, I like that we had to answer questions instead of write that long paper. So.
Right.
That was really nice.
Mm-hmm.
So just like a brief synopsis of the case. You have Gary Bettman, who is the, I guess you could call him he's kind of the head commissioner of the NHL. And then you have Gary Goodenow, who is one of the heads of the NHL union. And they're in a lockout. Lockout is basically no players are playing because they're trying to get a new deal, and nobody's really budging. The NHL union isn't budging on a salary cap, even though the NHL is losing money. According to those documents, it was like in the 200 million range. And so it's kind of just a brief synopsis. But what do we think? What do we think is the root cause of the problems?
When you look at all the lockouts that have happened over the years from baseball, basketball, football, I thought it was because, at times the owners are greedy and the players are greedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they've made it to the point where I don't know how people afford to go to the games. When I lived in Florida, we had a minor. Well, you had the top league, then we had the league down under. Mm-hmm. We could afford to go to the games because the tickets were only $10 a ticket.
Yeah.
$20 a ticket. So me and my husband were like, okay, we can afford to go watch a game once in a while. My husband said at one time he went to a National Hockey game, and he said the players feel they're entitled to it. They don't want to work for it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a little bit of entitlement. Definitely. Well, and then it was kind of weird that, especially in like the documents, that it was showing that like the NHL was losing money, but like the union and it sounds like the players were starting to budge, but like the union officials weren't budging at all. They didn't want to budge on anything. They didn't want to budge on the salary cap or anything like that.
No.
Yeah, they really refused to negotiate at all.
Yeah.
They wanted the union reps wanted their money.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I guess the way that they see it, they're like, we can always get new players, and like they can always look for new people if the people eventually don't budge. But
and they can just the NHL could even start a new league, like you said, and just get different players and not have to deal with the union. So
right, and I mean they could even get them for less money for that because they would all be new, but
yeah,
not really the way you want to go.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it's going to upset a lot of people.
I think the core issue here was the trust, though, because they didn't believe that the revenue reportings were accurate.
Yeah,
and that's why they weren't willing to budge, because they didn't feel like they were being, completely informed so that a proper decision could be made. So I don't think it was solely greed.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting that they still believed in that, even though like the Forbes report, they talked about how the Forbes report and a couple other reports even like confirmed that like the NHL was losing money. It was kind of interesting. Just a lot of distrust there.
But then if you look at also they have a smaller, I want to say demographic, but area. They don't have as many teams as everybody else does.
Yeah.
So their revenues aren't as high as baseball, basketball, football.
Yeah, exactly. So with how would you describe the culture of the NHL, like strengths and weaknesses, and just kind of how the NHL runs?
I'm not a hockey fan.
Right?
I'm not either, so.
I'm like anybody else in Alaska, and you would have a hockey fan, but me, not so much.
I'm in the South. It's football and NASCAR, so.
Yeah,
one of the things that surprised me was I think the history of the league, where they didn't, really have safety as a priority.
No.
I was talking about how they didn't have to wear helmets and things. So that kind of culture, I feel like that culture is kind of based on a little bit of a gritty history that reputation probably carried on.
Yeah.
For at least for the union.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was interesting that they established a union like so long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like this wasn't like they didn't decide in like the 1990s like a lot of these other players did. They like decided in like the 60s to like create a union, which was interesting.
Yeah, obviously back then they felt like they needed to be represented by some other organization other than the NHL itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't hockey more of a northern sport?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's very big in Canada, and it's big here in Alaska because it's the only sport that we have, honestly. Like, you can play other sports in schools, but it's the only national we have as a state.
Because I thought when you look at it, where they did the union back in the 60s, and when you look at where the hockey is from up in the northern spots, that's where the unions were very prominent up in that area.
Yeah.
Because down south, unions aren't that prominent.
Yeah, the places that have longer winters and have, more winter, like more snow in general, because it's one thing that they can actually play outside instead of keeping children in, and so it's a thing that they grew up on.
Yeah. So what are some of the best ways to strengthen a BATNA? That BATNA. That best alternative, I guess you could say.
I feel like the best alternatives need to be decided before negotiations even begin. Like when you go into a scenario where you're going to negotiate, you kind of have your end goal in mind, what your best outcome would be. But then you have to also figure out what the best alternatives would be so that you don't end up in this stalemate. You have that flexibility to say, okay, well, there needs to be some give and take, and I'd be willing to settle for this option because it's still a really good option. But that needs to happen before negotiations happen.
Definitely.
But to my thought, I'm right. I agree with you. But what I'm thinking is, even though the players are part of the union, it's like the union at times didn't have their best foot forward for the players. If players say, okay, as they did this, the union wanted more. They didn't at times listen to what the players wanted when they went into negotiations.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that they didn't, because it sounds like a lot of the players were kind of done playing in kind of like the European leagues or even like the regular American league. They just wanted to move on and kind of get to playing again. So
yeah.
So is it possible to change another person's ZOPA or zone of possible agreement?
I think it can be, depending on what you bring to the table. I mean, there's a lot of things that people don't necessarily think of when it comes to what you're negotiating. especially if they're not the ones who are able to, give that.
Yeah.
So I feel that if, the league actually brought in different points of view and like different, possible benefits and not, necessarily just raises or stuff like that. I think there are things that could change the minds of the players to where they would want to, change their agreement. But it really depends on what you're looking at and who you're dealing with.
Yeah. Well, and I felt like Bob Goodenow, I felt like he wasn't like representing the other players, and the other players, like there's zone of possible agreement and Bob Goodenow's were completely different.
True.
Not in the beginning, though. I feel like they were all on the same page, but then when the league kept threatening more and more, and then eventually canceling the whole season, that's when the players started to cave in and say, well, we would take a salary cap. So I feel like it was the league that kind of got a little bit more harsh with their negotiating tactics.
Yeah.
To make at least the players cave in and expand their zone of,
Well, and just be willing more to kind of, okay, let's do a salary cap. We can always redo it again, things like that. So
yeah.
So with this, what barriers would you seek to remove, and how could you specifically remove them, if possible, obviously?
Well, one of the barriers, I think the biggest problem for the union was the fact that they felt like the reportings were altered or skewed. And it said at one point that the league actually hired somebody to go through and kind of do an audit, but the union kind of felt like, that they couldn't really trust that reporting. So So my question was, well, why didn't the union have somebody that they could trust go in and do an audit so that, the accurate reportings could be had for all? So
I think
that was a barrier.
But like you said back before, the trust issue between the two of them, neither one could trust the other. And then why couldn't they both say, okay, we go hire the independent person, nobody knows them here.
Yeah, and then that way they could start breaking down that barrier, at least for the union side, so that if the reportings came back that everything was accurate and that, they truly couldn't afford to pay these high salaries, then maybe the union would be more willing to discuss salary caps at that point. But
right.
Well, and that kind of deals with the next question as well. It's just, what would you do? It's both for the NHL and the NHL Hockey Players Association to kind of resolve the situation. So that kind of deals with those questions as well. Just bringing in that kind of independent auditor that both could trust, that both, there's nobody has a cat in that game, and so they can just, hey, we can both trust this. It's fine. We can agree on this, and so.
I feel like the salary cap was the other big issue. I feel like the league was probably coming in with too low of a number that the union wasn't comfortable with. So if they could find some medium ground, maybe the union would be more willing to, go with the salary cap if it was higher, something that they felt they would be more fairly paid.
Yeah.
I always see about the salary. I always see it too. It's like, okay, you guys play. Yes, we pay you to play, but sometimes can't you live within your budget?
Yeah.
Right. You're like, we're already paying you so much, why are you needing more?
Right.
One of my
That's all
parents' favorite movie. One of my parents' favorite movie was the Replacements movie, where the whole football team goes on strike, and what they do instead of canceling that whole state's team is they just got a whole bunch of replacement players until the end of the season or until those people, got off of strike. But because they did that, they didn't actually have to change the cap
Yep.
that they were paying people
Right.
because the players realized, oh, I guess I'm actually replaceable. Like, well, I guess I am making a lot more money than I realized, or I can live within my means, kind of a thing.
Exactly.
That's
Well,
kind of like what I see with this, although they didn't take it to that well, they took it to a different extreme. But
Right.
I almost feel like if they would have, tried something like that, it might
Uh-huh.
have dissolved a lot quicker.
Yeah.
True.
Well, and just kind of, well, and I don't know. I always think of this basketball player. It was just last year. He took a pay cut. I think he's getting, instead of like $15 million a year, he was only going to get $5 million a year.
Oh, poor baby.
Yeah. Well, and I always think of him when situations like this happen, because he gave an honest interview, and he wasn't joking. He was being honest, and he said, I don't know how my family's gonna live on like $5 million a year. Like, we're gonna have to like adjust to all this, like less money and all this stuff. And it's like, how do I pay? How are people willing to pay you?
Right.
And so,
I think that type of mentality is true no matter how much money you make. If you found out from 15 million to 5 million, that's quite a cut. If you were only going to receive 1/3 of your salary,
Right.
it would probably be the same, even though there's people who would make, much less.
well, the issue was he was a terrible player. Like, he wasn't very good. So.
Oh, well, that doesn't help.
So he needs to practice more, and then we'll think about paying him more.
Yeah, he was sitting on the bench most of the time, getting paid $5 million to just sit there, and so that's why.
Wasn't there somewhere in it? And like I said, I can't read and drive it, but weren't they talking about safety or health concerns too with it all? If I was not mistaken.
Yeah, that was the NHL, and the NHL tried to counter with, hey, we'll give you, I think it was like a $42 or $44 million salary cap, but on top of that, we'll put like, I think it was like $4 million into like making sure that like healthcare costs are covered and things like that. So.
But when I look at it today, I would say, okay, I'll play for $3 million if I get all my health care covered after I retire.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you see in sports now these days, many are leaving earlier because of the concussions, and they're like, I'm living out of a bottle of painkillers.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of like addictions to painkillers and things like that, and so. Yeah.
Because my husband told me at one time he did read most hockey players have their teeth pulled and put in dentures.
Oh yeah, most of them. A lot of those guys, outside of the goalies, because the goalies usually don't get hit as often. Most of those guys are experiencing some major concussions, losing some major teeth, because a lot of them don't put in mouth guards or anything like that, and so.
Which always makes you wonder, like if that headgear is actually doing any good for them.
Yeah.
Just because, like, if you're not smart enough to, put the mouth guard in and like all that stuff, but I don't know. It kind of makes me laugh because I'm like, oh yeah, the goalie doesn't get hurt as much, but that's because one, he's not going up against other people per se,
Exactly.
but he's choosing to block it in a way that he's not going to get hurt. Plus, he has a bunch of padding. But I'm like, if you ever go to a hockey game, you will see at least like 3 fights break out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's really hilarious to watch. But I mean, you think about it, and you're like, what is all that anger? Like, why do you have to stop and break out into a fight in the middle of the game? Like, what is the purpose of that? Just to rile up like the crowd? I don't get it.
Well, I mean, some people only go there for the fights. I mean, that's the real reality. So.
Very true, but that's only because that's like fear that they've created,
Yes.
Well, and if you think about like soccer, it's almost like hockey. Games can end in 1-1 or 0-0, but people go there because eventually something crazy is going to happen in the crowd. Something crazy is going to happen on the field. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm fine to risk concussions if I know I'm going to get one, but to go out of your way to get a concussion like some of these guys in football or hockey or whatever, it's kind of interesting. So, but so then the last few questions. So, what gospel concepts are pertinent in this case?
It's the trust issue.
Yeah.
It's integrity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you come all down to it, it's which side has the better integrity. They both, and probably in players' eyes, I wonder in the players' eyes, have the players lost unions lost the integrity, the National Hockey League lost the integrity, and the players are like, who can I trust?
Well, and we're going to talk about the rest of the story after this last question because I'll tell you about what happened. But are there any, and then the last question, are there any concepts from this week's readings that pertain to this case? And if so, what are they? Kind of the last question.
To go back to the gospel question real quick, the thing
Yeah.
that came to my mind was the zone of possible agreement. And when I was picturing that, I was thinking like of a square, and I could place a dot anywhere in that square and still be okay with myself. But
Yeah.
if you place a dot outside of that square, that's my zone of no agreement. And you have to live that way with your gospel principles too. You have to kind of draw a circle of what you're willing to do or not do or say to have your integrity. So,
Yeah.
so that was my gospel connection. But as far as the reading connection, I think one of the biggest takeaways from that book we read was that conflict is good. Conflict is needed. I mean, as long as you're doing it appropriately.
Yeah.
Right.
Obviously, the fights breaking out on the ice is not good
Yep.
conflict, but conflict can be healthy. It can drive both sides to find something better than what they had before.
Yep.
And you just have to be willing to have that flexibility to compromise and to find the alternatives that work best for everyone.
Well, and it can drive change as well, just like you were saying. It can drive change for both sides, and so
Yeah. Progression.
Yeah. Any other comments before I tell you guys the rest of the story?
Nope.
I'm good. All right. I want to hear the story.
Okay, so the rest of the story, the union turns out they were in the wrong. Bob Goodenow, the head of that union, they came to an agreement on July. I had to do all this research by myself. That's what they told us as kind of the group discussion person to do, is do all the research on ourselves about what happened. So they came to an agreement on July 13th, 2005. Bob Goodenow was asked to resign. He was asked to resign that day, and he officially resigned 5 days later. Ted Saskin, who you kind of heard about a little bit, he was kind of the guy with Bob Goodenow in the union. He took over for a little less than 2 years and was officially charged with fraud and misconduct. And let's see, did he serve any jail time? He didn't serve any jail time, but he was asked to pay like over $1 million. Same with Bob Goodenow. They were both asked to pay a fine because of fraud.
Really? That's crazy.
Yeah, because they had frauded the frauded the players, and the players felt that they were
True.
misrepresented
because they missed out on that whole season.
Yeah, and the players were very upset with them, and it doesn't tell you about any of the other people. It just says a couple of the other people were asked to lock out as well, were asked to resign as well. Yeah, and then the other guy, Gary Bettman, he's still the head commissioner of the NHL. He's still the same. He wasn't asked to resign. He's still the same guy, still the same job. He was actually very much like congratulated with how well he did during all those during the lockout. They had another lockout, but it wasn't as bad. But he's been, I mean, all the articles I read about him, he was very much praised for how well he was treating the players, how open he was. But not Bob Goodenow. He was asked to resign pretty much immediately. So which is super interesting. So, and then Ted Saskin, he lasted a season before he was fined and resigned as well. and so again, I think, and again, kind of the things we talked about is the union just, I think they kind of got a little bit too much power hungry, and the players, as soon as Bob Goodenow resigned, the players welcomed a new salary cap. I think it ended up being $42 million salary cap. So, they're not going hungry by any means.
Right.
And that actually increased sales. The sales went up and everything like that. And then a year or two later, that salary cap went up because the NHL was starting to do a lot better. So.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It all comes down to the bottom of the mighty dollar. How
Yep.
How much were the owners willing to give to the players willing to give?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys saw, but Maddie had actually sent some of her thoughts, and
Yep.
she was kind of funny because she says that she thought that the union was being especially unreasonable. She said, "I don't know if anyone else felt the same way, but to me, you think that at some point the fact that the NHL is not doing very well and they don't have much money to go around, she didn't understand why they kept demanding a higher salary." So it sounded like she kind of hit the nail on the head there.
Which is perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. It sounds like the NHL union, I just kind of read a little bit on them, and they've been going through kind of different people as they've called new people. It sounds like the fraud and kind of misconduct has kind of gone pretty deep. And so they've gone through in the past from 2010 to, let's see, 2005, they went through four top people, and most of them only lasted about 2 years before they were kicked out and charged with something.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
It comes down to when they get into the unions. My dad worked for UPS many years ago, and they had to pay into Teamsters. And
Yep.
it is a power hungry, power. They want the ultimate power.
Yep.
They don't, when you think about it a little bit, and it goes back to the gospel concept, the war in heaven, the war between the war. Satan wanted the power. Christ was saying, I don't want the power. We need to glorify Heavenly Father. If you look at the union, it's power, power, power. They didn't want to, you don't want to say glorify the players, but they weren't there to represent the players the best they could.
Exactly.
Or the spirit of the game, the drive because you love the game, not because you're not playing because you love money. You play because you love the game.
You play.
Exactly.
The people that do play, they'll tell you, I played to love the game.
Yep.
Mhm.
Now, you do get the ones that play because they want the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you get that anywhere. Like with jobs, people kind of give up, what they love to do for what pays better.
Exactly.
So, you kind of get both sides, whether you're in that field or not.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So Bob Goodenow, he lasted the longest out of the last four. Last four, yeah. He lasted for a while, but then because of that lockout and because all the players really felt like he wasn't representing them, he got kicked out, and a bunch of other people got kicked out. Ted Saskin only lasted for 2 years, and he got kicked out, and a bunch of other people got kicked out with him, and they thought they were done. And then this Paul Kelly, he only lasted for a little bit before he wasn't even asked to resign. They officially fired him, and a bunch of other people under him had to resign. But it sounds like the new guy, he's actually doing pretty well. So.
How long has the new guy been in for? Like.
He's been in since 2010.
Okay, so 6 years now, almost 7.
Yeah, so he broke that little 2-year cycle.
Oh, good. We finally have someone who's worth something over there.
Exactly.
He's broken the cycle of a business after the first couple of years, you're going to know if business makes it or not. Well, he's made it.
Right,
Exactly.
right.
Yeah, and a lot of the other guys, they were either asked to resign and then charged with something like fraud, or they were just outright fired. So
Okay.
So it sounds like the players were pretty upset, and they were moving through people pretty quickly.
Mhm.
Yeah, that is the case. There's actually no more questions. Anybody have any like final comments?
This one probably was the easier one because we had the questions to answer, like you said.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
right. It gave you a guideline to follow more than just you going with what you feel.
Exactly. I like that. And I like that a lot. I like looking up all the terms and everything, and they allowed you to look up like really how to negotiate and all these things, and it was interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that part was fun. I liked that part of it.
Yeah,
Good change up from previous weeks.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was perfect. So, yeah. Who has it next week?
Well, next week is different. I don't know if you guys have been looking ahead at all. I've been trying to tell myself to get all my homework done early because I want to like buy myself an extra week off of school.
Well, it's like we have to like meet and go over like our accountability or something like that.
Yeah, all of our goals that we made for this semester, we're
Yeah.
supposed to go over them and share like 5 to 7 minutes of how we feel we did, like how our goals went, with the group.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we just need somebody in charge
Post
of
that one.
recording it.
Yeah.
And I'm picking up from the airport at that same time.
Okay, so it's next week that you're doing that?
No, am I over next week?
I don't think so.
I don't know. Either way, I mean, we can almost do it. I mean, outside of Tuesday, I'm pretty open just because Tuesday is my last day of school. So.
Yeah.
What time Tuesday?
Not Tuesday, right?
Oh, I could still do Tuesday. My class on that day isn't until 3:15 p.m. That's Mountain Time. So.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I can do Tuesday. I think I'm set anytime Tuesday. I'm open.
Okay.
But
I'm
you
looking
guys
at my
realize
schedule because I'm sure I work that day, but I don't think I work until, like, if we did it at our normal time, I think I'd be fine.
Okay.
So Tuesday at 10 Mountain.
Yeah.
11 Central. Okay, that works.
Okay, and then will someone email Maddie to see if she can do it as well?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
Perfect. I will